Welcome back from Taylor Mill, Kentucky at Scott High School, where we're getting set for the second half of action. And the hosts, Scott Eagles, have been very unkind to their guests from down the AA Mason County as they lead 36-0 and have instituted the running clock already with 8:12 to go, as we said, in the second quarter. Scott Borders alongside Dave Borst up here at Scott High School on their homecoming. And it has been all Scott, a team that for Dave and I has been very fun to watch. But when we're sitting around talking about the latest internet meme with an animal at halftime,
yeah,
you know, the game wasn't as interesting as it might have been. But there were a lot of things to see, at least on the Scott side of the football. We saw Kyron Simpson really get into the offense. We saw what we wanted to see out of Quincy Perrin, in our opinions, one of the best backs so far, at least in Kenton County, that we've had the opportunity to watch play, and a very solid job of running the offense on all fronts for Scott High School. For Mason County, they threatened to move the football, but that was about it. Never really got close to the red zone. And a team that has at times been able to move the football this year has run into a juggernaut here on the Scott Eagles.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. If there's one word that jumps out at me from the first half, it's speed. And the difference in speed between these two teams, it is all clearly on the Scott side of the football. And it shows on the scoreboard, 36-0, and Scott's going to get the opening kick and another chance to score.
And he'll get pretty good field position as it's kicked directly to the sideline and out of bounds. That was the first time we've gotten to see Mason County in a kickoff situation, and not a good one.
No, plenty of leg, but
like my golf drive.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Plenty of length, but don't know exactly where it's going.
So the clock already running at 11:34 as we are into the third quarter, and Scott, who deferred the opening coin toss, now will have the ball to start things off here in the second half, and kind of try to keep track of players as they've switched some out and left some in. That is not Omer at quarterback, and there's a run up the middle and a big gaping hole, and Scott starts off the second half with number 12, David Patrick, a senior, and he will play tailback from time to time. David Patrick came into the game with 106 yards rushing and a touchdown. Look for him to get some extended carries, but here comes Omer right back into the game. So like we thought, you're not going to necessarily go to your bench quite at the beginning of the third quarter. In this second half, as fans know, will go by pretty quick with the running clock.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that negative play of the game, really, for Quincy Perrin. And
I couldn't see if that was Perrin running. Again, we have so much trouble seeing the jersey numbers.
It was.
And no, it's not because we're old and have bad eyesight. It's not, let's just say they're great uniforms, not the best scheme for an announcer up in the press box.
Yes, they are very sharp, but, they're very difficult to read from this far away.
Decent gain on second down will get them into Royal territory. They'll mark the ball right at the 48-yard line, where it'll bring up a third and makeable 6. A couple players do come hobbling, and that's one was Omer, kind of slow to get back to the sideline. Again, a kind of rarity these days that you see the quarterback go all the way to the sideline to get the play.
Makes you wonder how many miles he runs every game.
I'm sure he's in shape. I don't worry about that. But in college now, you see the big charts with the 4 different symbols on them, and that's used predominantly in college right now.
Yeah, they always have something signifying what that play is.
Boy, I tell you, that play looks dusted, and this may be another touchdown. If Simpson almost did an exact duplicate of the play he had in the first half where he cut back against the grain all the way across the field. He had one man to beat on that play. And again, it looked like he wouldn't get it. he kind of turns it on. I'm not sure he ever got to full speed.
Yeah, fortunately for Mason County, Jacob Ledford just happened to be there and happened to have the angle and made the touchdown-saving tackle because Kyron Simpson was about to kick it into fourth gear and take off for that pylon again.
And the folks at home can see what we're seeing. It's not bad tackling. They're not getting close.
Yeah.
To even making the effort to get the tackle.
Scott's just plain outrunning him.
There's just a simple drive right up the gut, and that's going to go for 6 or 7 yards on first down, and Scott moving the ball well again.
Just another huge hole on the right side. You can't credit the Scott offensive line enough for the job that they have done up front tonight. They are just imposing their will on the defensive line of the Mason County Royals.
Yeah, we bragged about the speed being a factor, and it definitely is. We've bragged about a lot of the skill players, but you're right. There's a front four up there who's done a magnificent job of pretty much exerting their will over Mason County in this game. There goes another handoff, a wide open hole over the left side down to the 1 yard line. And I could not see. I believe that was Patrick again.
Yeah, it was. It was, and again, Cole Jones, number 3 on the tackle, but really you get the feeling he's just putting off the inevitable there.
Most definitely, and Scott knocking at the door to keep their touchdown string going here into the second half.
Has Scott had to punt the ball tonight?
I don't recall. So.
I don't recall them setting up for a punt. Seems like they have scored every time they've touched the ball.
It really has. And there's over the left side, Patrick went in but did not get the signal. His team gave him the signal. And a few linemen throwing their hands up, but not the important guys in the striped jerseys.
I don't know how in the world they kept him out on that play. It looked from our angle like his head and shoulders were across the line.
Of course, it's got to be the ball, and they did get his body turned pretty quick, but I agree with you. He looked awful close.
Yeah.
The clock keeps running. We're approaching the 6-minute mark, the halfway point in the third quarter. That just shows you how fast it can go with that running clock.
Yeah. And this is still Scott's opening drive of the second half. Mason County yet to touch the ball other than to kick it away.
And there's a tackle in the backfield and a loose ball, and I believe Mason County lands on it. Boy,
sure did.
That's something we haven't seen Scott do.
They stripped him. A nice job of meeting him right at the point of attack, right in the hole, and it was Patrick again. They were trying to get the senior into the end zone, and that time they stripped him.
Both arms off the ball is really what he did. You could see him pull his arms apart, and the ball just pops free, and Mason County there, although very deep in their own territory at their own 6-yard line, but a nice job in the red zone to get a stop.
Yeah, so finally something positive for the Royals. Let's see if they can.
They came a long way tonight. They needed something.
Yeah.
That's a long drive home down the AA.
Boy, it sure is. Let's see if they can capitalize on the turnover now.
Pitch outside to Chambers, who has been their workhorse, and Chambers out across the 10-yard line. So a nice run to start things off on first down, as Mason County, again, can take up chunks of yards here and there.
Yeah, just a really hard-nosed bit of running by Chambers that time. It looked like that play was designed to come around the corner, and instead he cut it back up inside and just kept the legs churning and picked up about 7 on first down. Nice run.
And one of the things, we're at the 4A level in football, and we talk a lot about putting your subs in and when's the right time to do that. Keep in mind, these teams don't have a ton of subs.
Right.
These are smaller teams by nature. You see the long pass there is intercepted. That just hung in the air so long.
Yeah.
I think we could have sung campfire songs underneath. It was really just a ball up for grabs, and that's what happens when you throw it up for grabs. Somebody's going to grab it.
Yeah, just kind of playing center field back there was number 2, Logan Brinkman, a senior, and that's his first interception of the season. And once again, Scott setting up in Mason County territory. But you're right, Scott, we were remarking before the game that it just didn't look like Mason County had brought a whole lot of players with them.
Now, you can look right now, you've got a good view if you look at the team and then look at their sideline. You know, and these teams don't really run an offensive and a defensive unit. You basically take your best players and they go both ways.
Yeah.
But there's just not a lot of extra players is the point I'm making. So you can't exactly make wholesale changes.
Little razzle-dazzle again. And the ball out again. Wow.
And I believe got it back. Although that has got to drive Dan Woolley nuts. You don't want to get apathetic. That's why coaches hate playing in these kind of games, because at some point there's just lethargy that takes over the whole team, and nobody's really protecting the ball, and everybody's trying to do the fun stuff but not the work.
And that was number 11, Michael Kawea, who is normally a linebacker.
And I believe that was Patrick again up the middle for a good gain. And then put the ball at the 31-yard line.
So you got to figure how many times has Kawea touched the ball this year as a linebacker. He's had 4 tackles on defense. He's a junior. But very interesting how many defensive guys Coach Woolley is letting touch the ball on offense tonight.
Well, just like you said, a lot of guys, you see they run for the first down. There are a lot of guys who haven't had an opportunity coming into tonight's game. Yeah. And I'm sure Coach Woolley knew more about Mason County coming into this game, obviously, than we would have. So he had a notion of what he would be facing in Mason County tonight. I'm not suggesting he knew they were going to run off 36 points in the first half, but I am suggesting that he had an idea of some things he could try. Yeah. And it seems like everything he's turned up has worked to perfection for Scott, with the exception of a few turnovers here in the second, or one turnover and a couple of fumbles here in the second half.
Yeah, it's absolutely turned to gold for him tonight as he's just getting the ball into the hands of some of his best athletes. And you wonder, honestly, how much maybe homecoming has to do with that. It's a chance to
It never made a lot of difference to me as a player. I guess some are different. I always thought it's kind of a distraction, really, but if you look at the schedule here on out for Scott, they will be at Harrison County, who did a number on Mason County a couple of weeks ago, but that's a tough place to go play. Then you're playing up at Taft in Cincinnati, so always an interesting matchup when you play Taft, although Scott's been good, and they got the corner, and this time it was Homer. So Homer on the keeper. And then they play at Bourbon County. They come back home for their final home game against Holmes, and then the last game of the year I find a fascinating one where they will take on Lloyd at Lloyd. Yeah. And after what I saw from Lloyd last week, I got to believe that is a team who can play with Scott to a certain degree. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that game. Still, I'm hard-pressed to find a lot of teams I've seen this year that are better than what I've seen out of Scott. Now, we've got some other teams coming up that might fit the bill, but there is just nothing but green and a touchdown.
Just a huge hole for Patrick around the right side, and a little bobbing and weaving and a little stumbling over a would-be tackler at the 1-yard line, and the Eagles into the end zone again.
Well, it took longer than they wanted to, but with 16 seconds left, believe it or not, and the clock will stop after a score. So they'll get the extra point, and it'll start again on the kickoff. And that is up, and once again, they remain perfect.
Look at the leg on Cal Ellison. My goodness.
The young man has been able to do it. So 16 seconds left. They'll kick off, then we'll switch, and we will be in the fourth quarter. Although the game did start at 7:30. So we got to confess, we're going to get out of here about the same time anyway. The later you get into the seasons when the 7:30 games hit.
And this one, as we were told before the game by one of the Scott High School officials, when they have an opponent who's coming from as far away as Mason County was, they wanted to give them some extra travel time. So another reason to push this one back to 7:30, along with it being homecoming and the parade and festivities and so forth.
Then, of course, you make it for a late night getting home tonight.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And unless some things really drastically change for the Royals, it is going to be a long bus ride home.
It's one of the problems about being a little farther south in northern Kentucky or a little farther east is that you have to travel to most every away game. At least in northern Kentucky, it really serves like a big metropolitan area.
Yeah.
Even mostly teams in and around northern Kentucky.
Yeah, even the travel games for these teams, for instance, from here to Dixie or from Dixie to here, really not that far. I can recall growing up in a farming community in Southwest Ohio, we would routinely have hour bus rides, if not hour and a half road trips.
And you would have a bus that would take the fans. I mean, that's kind of how a lot of people grew up in those communities. I'm a city slicker, and I guess if anybody could say that in the state of Kentucky, I can. Growing up in Louisville, we were the same way. We played teams that were at times 10 minutes, 20 minutes away. It wasn't – road games typically weren't that far. Didn't get to travel much. In fact, even the playoff games that we played in mostly were in and around the Louisville area.
Yeah, it can be very disheartening when you've driven an hour and 10 minutes, hour and a half someplace, and
Those
you get your brains beat out.
The longest rides home.
Yes, absolutely.
True.
No talking. Heaven forbid you talk. Coach will rip your head off. And that is a long, quiet ride home.
Losing the state championship in the last few minutes and headed from downtown Louisville to the east end of town where my school was. That might have been the longest ride. The emotion of the playoffs. I love playoff time still in Kentucky. And I'm sure that, people will argue, and it's more than likely true, Texas, Florida has some of the best football in the country, and some of those places on into Oklahoma and
Georgia, Pennsylvania.
And Georgia, obviously. Kentucky,
real
definitely
hotbeds.
not on that level with their high school football, but you know what? It continues to grow and get bigger and better every year.
Yeah.
And we still see players coming out of the Commonwealth that go on to be great players in the collegiate level and in some cases the NFL. So there's still some pretty good football in this area.
Absolutely. And it's always kind of interested me when you talk about the tri-state area. Kentucky and Indiana known mainly for what? Basketball.
Correct.
They're considered basketball
this is
states.
a basketball state, yeah.
Ohio, on the other hand, a football state. Pennsylvania, a football state. So always very interesting how geographically you can be right next to each other, and yet you're known for two different sports. And maybe the one sport doesn't get enough credit for being as competitive as it is and as fun to watch as it is. And in Kentucky's case, I think that's football.
Well, people forget where Bear Bryant, Paul Bear Bryant, got his start was at the University of Kentucky.
Yes.
And the whole reason that he left the University of Kentucky was something that he knew before a lot of people really realized it, that it's a basketball state.
Yep.
It's a state that by and large is going to support the basketball and not the football. Headed south to Alabama, the rest is history. Alabama has become the preeminent college football program in football, and Kentucky the preeminent college basketball program. It's like they chose their paths even way back then. And you look the same thing in Indiana. Indiana over the years has had some fantastic coaches and players come out of IU or Purdue. Obviously, Notre Dame's a little bit of a different story, but for the most part, still a big basketball state. All the way up to the northern part of the state, it is a big basketball state. Now, Notre Dame kind of breaks the mold. That's Notre Dame football is the Dallas Cowboys of the college game.
Yes.
Or maybe the Cowboys of the Notre Dame of the pro game.
Can you imagine those coaches' lunches back then with Paul Bear Bryant and Adolph Rupp? He knew. He knew that there was no way.
Those are two egos that were too big for the state of Kentucky.
Yes,
I'll tell you that
exactly.
right.
That was never going to work.
No.
Never.
That would be like Woody Hayes and
Bob
Bobby
Knight. Yes. That's why, and as we see a timeout taken by Scott here, that's why when you think about what went on at the University of Tennessee, and I bring this up because we're coming up on 20 years since their national title with T. Martin the year after Peyton Manning left for the NFL. And Tennessee fires Phil Fulmer. You had Phil Fulmer, arguably a Hall of Fame head coach.
Who's now back in the athletics office, just to put that out there.
Right.
But you're right.
Back as an AD.
They fire a coach. You can argue whether he deserved to be fired or not, but the point was he had much success at Tennessee.
And they have never enjoyed that level of success since.
A 98,000-seat stadium, and they're having trouble right now just putting a good product on the field.
And you had Phil Fulmer on the football side, and you had Pat Summitt as the women's basketball
icon
coach.
Of women's basketball.
Icon, yes, yes, absolutely. And still to this day revered. I believe she's one of only a handful of coaches to have won over 1,000 games. Just insanely good. And they were the best of friends.
Yeah.
They were great friends. And so it's just interesting how the two programs that university was known for, football and women's basketball, coexisted in peace and benefited each other. And you take one piece of that puzzle away, and that university has not been able to recover for the last 20 years.
You know, and even you would think, well, has it had even any basketball success? Even the years they've been better than others, that they really haven't.
Yeah.
And the football has been, that's probably that was one of the 5 or 6 golden child programs that really has fallen off. It just, you can't think of it the same way anymore.
That was a premier job and a premier program in the SEC in a time when Nebraska was dominating everything. That was the decade of the 90s and Tom Osborne and it was, if it wasn't Nebraska, it was the University of Miami.
Correct.
And along comes Tennessee to kind of break all of that up. And the Tennessee, people may not realize it now, but back then they were the bad boy in the SEC. They were beating up on Alabama. They were beating up on Georgia.
They were one of the first teams that decided to run offenses that were pro-style offenses, which the SEC ended up being their trademark, and a lot of that was due to some of the influence of Tennessee. You see a nice carry over the right side there, but it was due to some of that influence. You know, the Big Ten known as the 3 yards in a pile of dust, and that's, that was that kind of football. The SEC started being known for the gadgets and the tricks and the big quarterbacks and the big arms, and it really defined who it was as a conference. And I'm sorry, and being a Louisville fan, this is hard for me to say. It is the premier conference in college football. There's nobody's close, and not even the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Sorry,
totally.
Ohio State fans. I know you're gonna. You'll email me. I know.
Look at your latest AP poll, and who are the top 2 teams in the country?
Exactly.
It's Alabama.
Who are the
and
teams
Georgia
that play in the national championship? It's not even really an arguable point.
Yeah.
So it's stating the obvious. There are a lot of people that have Big Ten mentality that don't want to admit that, but a lot of that, I think, is and part of it too. The tradition in college programs is big. But if you've got a choice of Big Ten tradition and SEC tradition, you're probably going where the weather's a little better.
Sure, yeah,
it gets awful cold in Michigan in the winter.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Tradition does not keep you warm.
Look at that trick play. Again,
nicely
they're just
done.
dialing up plays and taking out big chunks of yardage. We're approaching the 6-minute mark left in the game as we are at a frenetic pace here in the second half.
A lot of freshmen in now for Scott. That was Zach Shepard on the carry.
30 minutes, 6 minutes out of the 24 that you run off the clock. And that's about, depends on whether they score a touchdown here or not, obviously.
But yeah, you're right, Scott, and it's difficult. I have, of course, an enormous amount of friends growing up in Ohio who are Ohio State fans, and that word is short for fanatic, and they are fanatic about it. And they want to argue with me all the time that, Ohio State could beat an SEC team, and maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. The bottom line is –
hasn't panned out for them real well in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're looking at the latest poll and you've got 4 teams from one conference in the top 10. 4.
That says something.
That's
granted,
pretty strong.
Their polls, and the old argument used to be, well, if they're only playing each other, how well do you really know that? Trust me, we know.
Yeah.
Oh, just stop. short of the end zone, but And one of those things is the same thing we're seeing in this game, the idea of things like team speed and the
Yes.
athletes they put in the NFL.
Yeah.
These are the preeminent programs. And, you look at Alabama just for the number of players that they have not only put into the NFL, but they continue to get. This is a team, and I've often said this to my friends who are UK fans, there have been years where Kentucky's front 11 on offense and defense could compete with
Sure.
teams in the SEC.
Sure.
The problem in Kentucky was even in those years, they never had the depth
Yes.
that some of these other teams. Alabama literally can go 3 deep at every position and not miss much of a beat.
Yeah.
And that's something you can't say in most programs around the country.
And that's one of the things that people, I think, don't give Nick Saban enough credit for is keeping guys on that team
wealth
who are
of talent.
4- and 5-star recruits who are sitting on the bench for their first 3 years, keeping them from transferring. How he does that, I don't know.
People forget Sean Alexander, and that was a long time ago. A Northern Kentucky player played at Boone County High School, sat on the bench for Alabama for 2 years
Yep.
before becoming a player who the NFL just loved.
Yeah.
But I mean, he waited his time, and you go to Alabama knowing full well you're going to bide your time there.
Yeah, it is very, very rare for you to start as a freshman or even a sophomore at Alabama, and somehow he manages to keep those shelves stocked and keep those kids from transferring to other programs, where at every place else you start hemorrhaging players if you're not getting them enough playing time in their eyes, in their view. And somehow or another he's able to convince those kids to stay. And like you said, his 3rd and 4th string could beat most teams' 1st string around the country because they're all 4- and 5-star recruits.
Scott goes in for the touchdown, so they're going to add a little salt in the wound here. And they weren't running, again, I'm not a big fan of that. They're not running the score up. It's simply running their offense, and they did it very methodically. There was not a lot of
And those are all second and third teamers out there
Correct.
right now.
It
those
really
are,
is. This
those
is
are
what you're
freshmen
getting
and
now.
sophomores.
3:48 with the clock stopped now. They'll kick the extra point, and it won't be long. Scott will go on to their 3rd win of the year. We take a look at Mason County and what they have left. They will stay on the road next week at Bourbon County. Never an easy place to go play. And then it is Harrison County coming home. Holmes coming home to play at Mason County. They'll have Grant County on the road. They'll end the season at home with the Mountain team, Lewis County. Or Mountains for Kentucky.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Scott Eagles are able to take away from this game. Sometimes when you dominate an opponent this much to the tune of hanging half 100 on them with 3:48 to go in the 4th quarter, and you've had a running clock since 8:12 left in the first half, sometimes other than just saying, okay, we executed our offense, we did what we want to do, it's difficult to look at things on film and say, all right, we learned this and we learned that, and this didn't work, and this was a challenge that we need to meet, and this is something that we need to work on. And sometimes it's difficult to keep a kid's interest the next week in practice and keep him buying into the program, because a lot of them will look at you and say, Coach, we just put half 100 up on somebody.
And they better wake up, because it is going to get real interesting for them later on in the season. But this is a Scott team. I think a lot of people can sense this is another team that could make a run in the playoffs. They've got a lot of the weapons.
Boy, they sure do.
And you know,
They sure do. But 4 out of your last 5 games on the road, that's going to be very telling.
Yeah.
That's going to be very telling. And how they wound up with that schedule, that is tough.
Yeah, it did not favor the Eagles this year. It's why they're having to go from now and then they're quite a few weeks till they hit their last home game of the year. It's just amazing how fast this season is moving. We talked about it. It still feels like the beginning of the season in some ways for me, but we're right now doing our 5th game of the season, or it's the 5th week anyway, and so these teams are right at the halfway mark. Homecomings will be going in full by next week. This is really the earliest one, I think, around the region tonight here at Scott.
Yeah, and they really didn't have any choice. Their next 3 games are on the road, so they had to do it tonight or wait till the end of October, I guess. But Yeah, I mean, it just feels odd. The weather is just now cooling off. I mean, we almost hit 90 degrees again today. Heat and humidity. The summer
and the
has.
first day of fall tomorrow is going to be a high in the 60s.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
God
and,
knows.
and 70 degrees on Sunday. So hang in there, folks. That beautiful fall weather we all know and love
fall,
is coming.
I need it to be fall weather.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm
okay, but the heat. We're big guys, Dave.
Yeah,
the heat.
yeah. I pack a little more around than I should. I'll admit it, and the heat is not my friend.
Of course, my wife at home, we have the never-ending battle over the thermostat. All the secret strategies fought over that little box.
And that always seems to be a battle that the man is going to lose at some point.
Oh, I've told my wife, I'm convinced that part of her has died in the extremity. Her hands and her feet are that cold. I don't think that's humanly possible and still be alive. But
I think it was Jeff Foxworthy who once said, "I'm not kidding you. I can lick my hand, put it on my wife, it'll stick." She's cold all the time. Oh, boy, we've got a Mason County player down, and these are the things that you really hope do not happen in a 50-0 ball game with 1:41 to go, and he is not moving. Very little. Well, okay, they're stretching him out. I couldn't see what she was doing. They're working on a cramp.
And
it
again,
looks like.
that tends to be what it is. Still a muggy night, even with the cool breeze blowing. You got rain clouds in the area, and that always leads to some of these cramps that we see are so present. They're really just that's what they are. We used to call them Charlie horses. It's just where your whole muscle ties up.
And again, we talk about it every time we bring them up. For anybody at home who's saying, "Oh, it's just a cramp, shake it off," well, they've never had a cramp.
Not like that.
Because that hurts, and it locks up your entire body.
When you talk about the different injuries and things that football players do play with, people forget about those type of things that are really stuff you can shake off, but boy, that doesn't mean that it's easy to shake them off.
And it doesn't mean
things
that
like
it's
stingers. You get a stinger, and that's a horribly painful injury that really isn't, for the most part, you could come back from, but you remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those little nagging injuries that tend to build up and linger and affect you later in life. It may not be the major injury, the major knee injury or ankle injury or what have you that is repaired surgically or what have you. You have a chance to rehab and come back stronger from that. It's the little nicks and bumps and bruises that add up over time, and the next thing you know, you're our age and walking around sounding like you're making popcorn.
Every joint cricket. Well, and then, of course, in football, the debate continues with the head injuries, and we've seen a lot of that going on. It permeates throughout all divisions of football down into the high school level. But the good news is what I'm seeing out of youth football and out of high school football is they really are working at teaching the kids not to lead with their helmets.
Yes.
I've seen that on this high school level quite a bit over the last few years.
Yeah.
When I played, and this was back in the 80s, that gives my age away a little bit, but, that was I always said you looked at the scars on your helmet, the paint swap, and that was a sign.
Those were the badges of honor.
Well, the clock will wind down to 0, and it is 50-0. They hang a half century on the visiting Mason County. Does Scott High School, their record will improve to 3-2 as they get ready for a long road trip. And then for Mason County, coming down the AA, they will drop to 2-3. It was a big win for Scott, 36 points through the first quarter and 3.5 minutes of the second quarter, and that was about all she wrote. Once again, a fantastic job tonight. Loved watching Simpson and Perrin running the football. Dave.
Wow, what a tremendous effort by the Scott Eagles on homecoming. They couldn't have asked for this to go any better. They couldn't have scripted it any better, quite frankly. You got so many different weapons into the ball game that maybe you hadn't up to this point in the season, and you got to experiment with getting the ball into some other guys' hands and seeing what kind of weapons you do have. And it's going to make it very interesting for the final 5 games of the season for the Scott Eagles. As we mentioned, 4 of those games, though, on the road.
We will be back with more action on TBNK, but for tonight, for my partner Dave Borst, our producer Jason Dudas, this is Scott Borders saying so long from Taylor Mill, Kentucky. Our final score, Scott 50, Mason County nothing.